Okay, part 8. This will be the last part for this book, and the next one will be, I guess, when she arrives, and I can't wait for that one because we're going to get the scolding of a lifetime. I want to see what happens. Unshakable resolve. You have already been giving me that which I desire most, Lady Rosamond said to me. I will accept your name alongside your stories. Her words enter my ears and diffuse through my very being. Back when I had first voiced my desire to give Lady Rosamond my name, her golden eyes had clouded over with concern and reluctance, but now they were brimming with compassion and resolve. They crinkled softly as she regarded me with a warm smile. She accepted me not just my stories, but me as well. Ever since the Ivory Tower incident, I had spent years in isolation. My father beat me, and even those of my own faction ostracized me. My only respite was the book that Lady Rosamond had made of my stories. It gave me greater joy than of absolutely anything else. How should I express this happiness? I wanted to put my feelings into words, but none came to mind. Perhaps that was to be expected. Surely no one else could understand the relief and sheer depth of emotion that was coursing through me. I simply wanted to relish the joy. But whatever Lady Rosamond asked me about my family, I remember my father. I remember the way he had so suddenly turned his back on me and resorted to physical abuse. A sense of panic crawled up my spine and seized me by the heart. Please stop. I could tell that father and the others were trying to exploit me to get closer to the Archducal family now that they had lost their places in the former Veronica faction. It was disgusting and an affront to the compassion that Lady Rosamond had shown me. I asked that you allow me to leave my home upon receiving my name, I said. Lady Rosamond accepted my request, and for a moment I could feel at peace. I wouldn't let father do as he pleased again. I would ensure that Lady Rosamond didn't get wrapped up in his putrid schemes. Isn't this great, Roderick? Feline asked. I'm so happy for you. Thanks, Feline. I replied, genuinely appreciative. I had spent so long selfishly envying her, such that even when she had worried about me, I hadn't been able to accept how she felt. But now I could accept her congratulations without any hard feelings. I was more surprised at this change of heart than anyone. I no longer viewed things through the bitter lens of cynicism. I simply felt happy. However, to my regret, it seemed that Feline was the only one who was pleased for me. Most of Lady Rosamond's retainers were associated with Elias gangs, who were so untrusting of the former Veronica faction that they suspected even those who gave up their names. I was summoned to a conference room during Lady Rosamond's bath when she would not notice their absence, or what they were doing. 4 archnobles, Lord Cornelius, Lord Hartmut, Lady Brunhilde, and Lady Lenore, looked upon me with harsh expressions. There wasn't a single men-noble in the world who wouldn't come at least somewhat before this lineup. I swallowed hard, and the joy that had filled my heart soon gave way to worry. Would it even be possible for me to get along with Lady Rosamond's retainers after giving her my name? There is still time, Roderick, Cornelius said. He was the first to break the silence and watched me with hard, dark eyes. Won't you rethink this decision to give Lady Rosamond your name? There are a lot of people who won't take kindly to that idea of you doing this to become her retainer. It seems to me that you aren't just thinking straight. His attempt at intimidation was presumably because he didn't like me, but I wasn't going to surrender so easily. Others have said the same thing to me countless times before. Lady Rosamond has agreed to accept my name, I replied, and I have no intention of changing my mind. If you would rather this not happen, speak to Lady Rosamond. Lady Brunhilde drew her eyebrows together in a look of displeasure. I can see nothing but problems arising from this, she said. I don't oppose this openly, for Lady Rosamond has made her decision, but I would very much like to. Oh my, Lady Lenore added, I personally consider him preferable to someone like Traga, as he will at least be name-sworn. However, even without this faction business, I imagine that Lord Wolford will not appreciate his being here. I can only hope it will not sow seeds of conflict in his engagement with Lady Rosamond. Hartmut, what are your thoughts? I glanced up with a start. I was the one who had guided Lord Wolfred to the Ivory Tower, albeit at my father's orders, so I had been made to take full responsibility for his fall from grace. In other words, there would be no better source of discord between him and his fiancée. I hadn't thought about this from that perspective, so concern suddenly flared in my mind. Although I didn't intend to stop the name-swearing, I had no idea how my relationship with Lord Wolfred would develop. I peered at Lord Hartmut, whom Lady Lenore had asked for an opinion. In truth, I was more worried about Lord Hartmut than anyone. He was a skilled art scholar and would act as my boss, assuming that I became Lady Rosamond's apprentice med scholar. Out of all her retainers, my relationship with him was the most important. He would often narrow his orange eyes at me whenever I spoke with Feline, and seeing how sharp they were right now reminded me of that. The other day, Hartmut had advised me to voice my true thoughts and feelings to Lady Rosamond, so only then would she accept me. It was a kind gesture, but I suspected that his motivations weren't wholly altruistic. A breath later, he had said, You'll only get in our way if you continue to drag your feet. Make your choice now and get it over with. Will this be okay? I was perfectly aware that I wouldn't be welcomed with open arms, but I didn't want to be blatantly ostracized or bullied. I was in an overwhelming disadvantage here in terms of status. Upon noticing my gaze, Lord Hartman smiled. Lady Rosamine does not consider factions. She sees only individuals, he said. For that reason, why would I ever oppose someone who else has decided to accept? Or someone she has decided to accept. My, how surprising to think you would offer so little resistance, Lady Brunhilde said, widening her eyes and placing a hand over her mouth in shock. I was just as taken aback. I had assumed that he would be more annoyed than anyone. Lord Hartman raised an eyebrow and turned to Lady Brunhilde, offended. You find this surprising? He asked. Once I graduate, Lady Rosamine will only have Feline, a lay noble, as an apprentice scholar. I would rather she have an apprentice art scholar here, but there is nobody who would suit the role. So what choice do I have but to raise Roderick before next year? His mana quality may be closer to that of a lay noble, but he is a men noble all the same. The lack of apprentice scholars certainly isn't an epidemic. If you wish to raise him, Hartmut, I will accept that, especially as it seems that his resolve has not shattered, even in the presence of so many art scholars. Or archnobles, Lady Brunhilde said with resignation. Lady Lenore giggled, and with that the girls became a lot more welcoming. I wondered if they had been testing me to see whether my resolve was strong enough, and as I considered the likelihood of that being the case, Lord Hartman and Lord Cornelius stepped forward. Lord Hartman was holding out a small slip of paper. Roderick, you said that you didn't know how to make a name-swearing stone, right? Lord Hartman asked. I'll teach you later, so gather everything that is listed on this paper as soon as possible. The Royal Academy has a lot of good ingredients, that Ehrenfest does not. Thank you, Lord Hartman. I accepted the paper with trembling hands. It was like a test that I needed to pass in order to become Lady Rosamine's retainer. Listen well, Roderick, Cornelius said. We retainers won't help you with your gathering because we don't want others to wish to offer their names asking for our help too. Hire some apprentice knights to accompany you to the gathering spot and gather the ingredients you will need on your own. Understood. It will be done, Lord Cornelius. I had spent an entire year writing new stories to give to Lady Rosamine, and she had said that she would accept my name. They would teach me how to make the stone as long as I gathered the ingredients. Just a little more to do. Although the finish line was in sight, the final stretch wasn't easy. Collecting the ingredients that Lord Hartman had told me to fetch was too hard for me to do alone as an apprentice scholar. Some of the fae stones described needed to be taken from hunted fae beasts, which meant I would need to hire some apprentice knights to kill the fae beasts and then give me the stones. But I didn't have the money to pay them. My earnings from transcribing books had already been spent on basic necessities, and with my focus having been on writing stories for Lady Rosamine rather than doing much transcribing work, I hadn't earned all that much in the first place. This isn't good. Not knowing what else to do, I spent the following days working to transcribe books so I could earn as much money as possible. On one day in particular, the dormitory was abuzz with news that Professor Herscher had taken an Ehrensbach apprentice scholar as a disciple. Lord Ferdinand would apparently be coming from Ehrenfest and Professor Herscher from her laboratory in the Scholar Building to have a discussion. Even we regular students could tell how big of a deal this was. Those two were never in the dormitory, and now they were both going to be here at once. Seems like the Archducal family is a long way from trusting Ehrensbach again. I don't blame them. The nobles of the former Veronica faction were hoping the two brides from Ehrensbach being wed into the duchy would renew our relationship with Ehrensbach. But judging by how the Archducal family, their retainers, and Lord Ferdinand remained so cautious, that future would not be coming anytime soon. It would take a lot more for them to lower their guard. I viewed the impromptu meeting as something that wasn't my problem, and it wasn't until Lord Hartman called me over. Roderick, have you gathered the ingredients yet? No, not yet. I wanted to gather all the ingredients I needed in one go, since paying for guards was so expensive. To achieve this, I had to spend my time thus far researching the ingredients. I had yet to even step foot in the gathering spot. In order to minimize contact between Raymond and Lady Rosamine, we scholars are going to be acting as a bridge between them. There's now a lot more that you need to learn before next year, including how to gather information on Ehrensbach and how to watch out for what information Professor Herscher might be leaking. We can't just sit back and wait until next year to begin anymore. Get your ingredients gathered fast. That's much easier said than done. Archnobles may have a great deal of money on hand, but I cannot afford to hire guard knights to protect me or hunt fae beasts. I will not be able to gather my ingredients until after I've earned enough money for my transcribing. You must be dull on the head, Hartman said, fixing me with a scornful gaze. Or scornful glare. Status has nothing to do with it. If you don't learn to use all of your knowledge and connections to make money, you will never survive as Lady Rosamine's scholar. I'll teach you what to do this time, but learn to use your brain from then onward. Following Lord Hartman's instructions, I gathered the apprentice knights of the former Veronica faction who were looking for a means to speak with Lady Rosamine's retainers and deliver a letter to the Archduke by the end of summer. Lord Matthias and Lord Lorenz were among them. Lady Rosemine has elected to accept my name, I said. I must now gather ingredients for my name-swearing face stone, and to that end I wish to hire you as guards and as hunters. However, I will not be paying with money. Instead, I will instruct you on how to make your own name-swearing face stones, and vow to serve as your liaison with Lady Rosemine upon becoming her retainer. As expected, the apprentice knights grimaced in response. I continued to speak, straightening my back to look more imposing, and taking care not to let my voice shake. Is it not in your best interest to prepare your ingredients sooner rather than later? Did we not write our letter to the Ob with resolve in our hearts, knowing that we were contradicting our parents? Roderick, are you blackmailing us? Lord Lorenz exclaimed. Calm yourself, Lord Lorenz. I am merely offering some advice, I replied, almost disgusted at my own sophistry. From the perspective, I was obviously threatening to tell their parents what they had done unless they come gathering with me. Lord Matthias, who had been listening with crossed arms, narrowed his blue eyes at me. Roderick, these aren't your words, are they? They said. Out of all Lady Rosemine's retainers, I suppose Lady Lenore or Lady Brunhilde might have told you to say that. No. Considering how you wove threats into your euphemisms, it was probably Lord Hartmut. You are as astute as always, Lord Matthias, I remarked. After spending so long at the bottom of the barrel, or the bottom of the former Veronica faction, I hadn't even considered threatening them. I didn't specify who exactly had given me the instructions, but Matthias understood anyway. We don't want to go up against Lord Hartmut, he said. Let's do as he says and go gathering. But Matthias, Lord Lorenz protested, part of our compensation to Roderick serving as our liaison with Lady Rosemine. Given the current incident with Professor Herscher's disciple, it isn't a bad idea for us to prepare an emergency exit. Lord Mathieson looked at me again, his eyes more scrutinizing than before. But make no mistake, Roderick, I told you to be careful. You should stop after you gather your ingredients. You can't give your name to someone on a whim like this. His warning came to mind, but I had no intention of changing my decision. I understand that you were concerned for me, Lord Matthias, but that advice is not applicable. I said, it may seem I am doing this due to inertia, but I have spent an entire year searching for a way to serve Lady Rosemine. If giving her my name will earn me her trust, then that is what I shall do. Lord Matthias's eyebrow twitched. And what will you do when politics change? Regrets won't save you then. Are you again referring to that man? I doubt he regrets giving his name simply because the political landscape has shifted. I imagine that his loyal heart did not falter even when the one he has sworn to left for another duchy. He presumably spends his time thinking of what he can do for them and whether there is any way he can prove himself to be useful. The word frustration couldn't even begin to describe how someone would feel if their lord or lady were taken from their position as the next archduke and sent to another duchy. Is he talking about, Georgine? Or is he talking about somebody else? True, there would be a great deal to think about, such as whether their service had truly been enough, or whether there was something else they could have done. But their loyalty would never change. They would remain dedicated no matter the situation, for that was simply how much resolve was needed before a person offered their name. Have you not considered your family? Lord Matthias asked in what was almost a low growl. I thought back to my family and gave a bitter smile. There was my selfish, violent father and my mother who had readily changed to match. There was no place for me back home. Had there been one, I wouldn't have been so desperately sought for another. I wouldn't have so desperately sought for somewhere with Lady Rosemine. Do you think they would do anything for me? I asked. I intend to cut my family off soon. I will not forgive them bringing misfortune to my lady. But that would, Lord Matthias began, his blue eyes hardening. He had gone pale, and it was clear he had more to say, but I was fully resolved to give Lady Rosemine my name. Our conversation was going nowhere, and there was no point in us talking further. I wish to give my name, and that wish is who I am, I said. Nobody can change that except Lady Rosemine. Roderick's right, Lord Lorenz interjected, patting Lord Matthias on the shoulder. Leave things as they ask that, Matthias. Name swearing is supposed to be a private matter. It's not right for us to get in the way of something they've decided for themselves. Lord Lorenz turned his orange eyes to me. I think it's a good thing that Lady Rosemine resolved to take your name. We can watch you to find out a lot of the things we want to know. How the Archducal family views students of the former Veronica faction, how they intend to treat us, and how people will react to that. What's important here, Matthias, is where Roderick ends up, and that's not something for us to interfere with. Am I wrong? Are you telling me to exploit him? Lord Matthias asked. Hey, he's exploiting us for his gathering. Birds of a feather, right? And either way, it doesn't look like there's anything we can do to change Roderick's mind. Lord Lorenz was looking at me carefully as he spoke, seemingly trying to observe even the most minute reaction. He was right. At this point, it frustrated me to no end to be exploited. But I was already exploiting them to gather my ingredients, so we were indeed birds of a feather. If they wanted to exploit me, they were more than welcome to. I would just keep working to achieve my goals. Alright then, let's go. That Earth day, I produced my high beast at Lord Mathias' signal. I took to the skies with the apprentice knights consisting mostly of those from the former Veronica faction. And together we flew into the gathering spot, not noticing the long black line that was leading into it. Investigating the former workstock dormitory. Oh, here we go. Here's something good. Professor Roffin. I had knocked on the door to Herscher's laboratory, only to be met with a boy dressed in brewing gear and wearing an Ahrensbach scarf. He was presumably Herscher's disciple. He wasn't in any of the years I taught, so I didn't recognize his face or know his name. Professor Herscher, it's Professor Roffin, the boy said. Doesn't that mean it's time? One moment, came Herscher's voice. I'm currently on a roll. My apologies, but if you would wait just... Before the disciple could finish, I threw the door open and stepped into the laboratory, which was a complete mess. Herscher's attendant was nowhere to be seen. If you're her disciple, you need to remember this well. You can never believe Herscher when she says this shall only be a moment, I said. She might as well have said that she'll never be ready. You can trust me, because I've been through it all myself. Besides, I came here expecting to have to drag her out, so I'm not going to be doing any waiting. Please don't, the disciple stammered as I marched deeper into the room. The professor is in the middle of some very important brewing. Even as I approached, Herscher continued to stir, her focus unbending. There were several magic circles floating above her pot, and I immediately determined that it would be dangerous to interrupt things by pulling her away. Alright, how am I going to deal with this? Herscher, it's your job to clean up after the Ehrenfest students' messes, I said. I know, and that's why I made preparations to do just that. Now, I believe that we agreed on third bell. Do not interrupt me until it rings, if you will. It was clear to see from the fact that Herscher's attendant had cleaned her up that she hadn't forgotten her schedule. I had wanted us to arrive at the central building before the bells rang, but that was no helping that now. It's on you when Fraulein screeches at us for being late, I warned. Her screeching does not impact me, so I will simply ignore her. Just the thought of those shrieks ringing in my ears made me miserable, but Herscher did not seem bothered in the slightest. You can ignore those awful sounds? I find you infinitely more annoying, Roffin, as you are interrupting my brewing. I suppose she needs to have such thick skin when she's always doing what she wants like this. 27, it's 23 more pages. Almost at minutes. After being shooed away by Herscher, I asked her disciple where I could wait. In this disastrous laboratory, all the seats normally reserved for visitors were piled with wooden boards. You're going to wait here? The disciple asked. There's nowhere proper to sit since Lady Rosamund's been too sick to visit for days now. And her attendants don't usually come in until Professor Herscher finishes her brewing. I grimaced and looked around. The closest thing to a proper seat was the chair that Herscher seemed to use herself. I can't leave, otherwise she'll start on another brew, I said. I've got no choice but to wait here. Again, speaking from experience. I sat down on Herscher's chair, but it was hard to believe that this place could accommodate visitors at all. Even the men's waiting room in the knight's dorm was better kept than this mess. Herscher's laboratory was just awful all around. Well, it's not a place for visitors, it's a place for work. I used my time spent waiting to think over today's schedule. We were going to be investigating the workstock dormitory since Turnish Performance lived in old workstock. And there was a trail leading from its sealed-off dormitory to Ehrenfest's gathering spot. There was enough evidence for the king to grant us permission for us to investigate the dormitory under the watch of the Sovereign Knight's Order. 3 possible explanations for the Turnish Performance sudden appearance were being considered. Someone had deliberately brought one into the academy grounds, there was a nest near the dorm, or some ungodly series of coincidences had resulted in the beast activating the teleportation circle in the old Workstock castle. As far-fetched as that third option sounded, they were fey beasts, which meant they had mana. And according to those managing the old Workstock castle, although it was unlikely, they couldn't be completely discounted. Hopefully this problem solves itself once we're there, but I can't imagine it will. It was hard to believe that we'd see any results considering that the selection of professors for this mission was absolutely terrible. First was Herscher. We're already fighting tooth and nail just to get her involved, and since it meant stepping away from her research, she wasn't interested at all. Of course, she didn't really have a choice in the matter since this Turnish Befallen incident was connected to Ehrenfest. Next was Fraulein, who was furious that Ahrensbach was being considered a suspect just because they managed the old Workstock dormitory. She had shrieked in protest during our meeting, and I could tell she was going to be just as furious for the duration of our investigation. I didn't even want to get close to her since just having to endure her voice was enough to tire me out. Third was Gundolf, the dormitory supervisor for Drwonkel and a professor of the scholar course. We hadn't spoken much before, owing to the fact that we taught different years and courses. He had enthusiastically volunteered for this mission because it involved a rare fey beast that he wouldn't normally have a chance to see. I got the feeling that he was going to prioritize researching it over investigating the cause of the incident. And finally, there was me. Renatus would normally have been involved in the investigation since he was the one who had gotten Lady Charlotte's ordonnance, but he was the oldest professor on the night course. I was taking his place for the on-site investigation with the Sovereignty Knight's Order. But I knew better than anyone that I wasn't suited to a brainy mission like this. I could hunt fey beasts with my eyes closed, but investigating a dormitory for clues was another story entirely. In other words, this group was doomed to squabble and make no progress whatsoever. It didn't take a genius to figure that out. It's third bell, Hersher. Let's go. I'm not waiting any longer. Good grief, your impatience is the reason women are so keen to avoid you, you know. She didn't need to say that. Hersher made no attempt to hide her bitter expression as she stepped away from the brewing pot, but it seemed that she actually had managed to finish before the bells rang. Her talent and general competence made it hard to get mad at her, which was irritating. Well, still, it didn't stop me from pretty much dragging her out of the laboratory. Even as we started on our way to the central building, I noticed her glancing back enviously at her research-focused disciple. I'd rather you didn't keep wasting my time like this, I said as we walked. Oh my, such a selfish remark. I think you'll find that I am the one having my time wasted. The tradition fallen is dead and buried. If more arise, we need only slay them as well, and that is that. I may not have been all that impressed with how she always pushed her work onto other people, but I agreed with her in principle. If a fey beast shows up, kill it. Life would be so much easier if things were that simple. I can tell you've already distilled your thoughts on the matter, but we still gotta figure out how this happened, I said. That's why we asked the king through the Sovereign Knight's order to unlock the door to the old workstock dormitory. Not to mention there are a lot of questions that Lady Rosamund will never answer, and we still need to question her. You need to be here as the dormitory supervisor. Ah, yes, another issue that you lot keep droning on about. Just how much of my research time do you intend to waste? Can we at least postpone the inquiry, Hersher grumbled. The inquiry has already been postponed once for Lady Rosamund's tea party since Prince Hildebrand refused to budge on the matter. We're not going to put it off any longer. How unfortunate, Hersher replied with a smirk that made her true feelings more than clear. We continued through the central building and eventually reached the corridor lined with doors. The nearest door led to the dormitory of the first, the one beside that to the second, and so on. Soon enough, we reached the doors without numbers. Those led to the fallen duchies, and one of them belonged to the old workstock dormitory. A sovereign knight was standing in front of it. The other professors have already arrived. Do come in, the knight said, and open the door for us. We went inside and found that there was already an argument going on. There were two sovereign knights, Gundalf and Fraularm. What's going on here, I asked. Gundalf was stroking his beard and staring at Fraularm through narrowed eyes. As soon as we entered the dormitory, Professor Fraularm cast Wash, and he said, She what? We are here to look for traces of the tradition fallen and any criminals related to its sudden appearance. Casting Wash would erase all of our potential evidence. What in the world were you thinking? I exclaimed. Goodness, how can you expect me to enter such a filthy place without cleansing it first, she screeched at me. My clothing would have been ruined. Oh, boo-hoo-hoo. You're investigating this place. You have to keep it preserved so you can find evidence. Hello? It's like, what if there was a murder? Huh? You wouldn't be allowed to do that. That was far from being a good enough reason. If she couldn't tolerate her clothes getting dirty, then she was just getting in the way. I wanted to insinuate that she should get out. But I knew that she would just explode at me about how she was going to clear Arensbach's name no matter what. It was obvious now why Gundalf and the Sovereign Knights looked so vacant. Fraularm was beyond communication. However, it seemed as though Fraularm was feeling the same irritation as we were. She looked at Hersher, who was keeping her distance in an attempt to remain uninvolved, and saw her agreement as a fellow woman. You understand my feelings here, do you not? No. In truth, this place doesn't seem particularly dirty to me, Hersher replied. No wonder, this is nothing compared to the garbage heap where you live. There was no point in seeking camaraderie from Hersher, even if an average noblewoman would normally agree. She had an even greater tolerance for filth than I did. If you are that concerned about cleanliness, then you need only wear brewing clothes or some other garment that you would not mind getting dirty, Hersher continued. Casting Wash will only make it seem that you are destroying evidence. Goodness, I refuse to accept that from someone who could not even arrive on time. Hersher was in the right here, but Fraulein was driven entirely by feelings, facts that just wouldn't get through to her. And she would only become more emotional the more she spoke with Hersher, so I signaled Gundalf to help me defuse the situation. We'll never finish if we spend all day arguing among ourselves, I said. I say we split into groups. Indeed, Gundalf agreed. We may work with Professor Hersher, and now with Professor Fraulein. Initially, we will only have one Sovereign Knight overseeing each group. The Sovereign Knight's order had sent knights to watch us, not just to make sure we didn't conceal any evidence, but also to ensure that we didn't try to pocket the rare tools and materials littered about the dormitory. Professors generally put their research above everything else, and for that reason, they needed someone to keep a close eye on them. We shall cover the first floor now that it is clean. Those who care not about filth may wallow in the kitchen, the cellar, and the like, Fraulein said, smugly puffing out her chest for some reason. Arguing with her would only be a waste of time, so Hersher and I walked away in search of stairs to the basement. Frauleim's wash had cleansed only the entrance hall and the first floor's hallway, so the rest of the dormitory was still in a complete state. We opened one door and found that the room behind it was thick with dust. The furniture was either broken or collapsed, and there was a door to a hidden room that was still registered despite its master no longer being alive. This place sure is a mess, I said. Well, Workstock fought until the bitter end, Hersher replied. Such is the power of a greater duchy. All of a sudden, I recalled a friend of mine from my school days. We had faced each other in dinner until our graduation, after which he had joined the Sovereign Knights Order, and then died as a guard knight serving the Fourth Prince. The faces of dead friends came to mind one after another, reopening old wounds that I usually kept stuffed into the corners of my mind. Reminds me of all the students I saw one year, but not the next, I muttered. After Workstock fell, its land was split between Ahrensbach and Dunkelfelder, but not all students ended up in one duchy or the other. A lot of them died. Could you not get all emotional on me, Hersher said. Now I understand that we're here to investigate why the Fabies appeared, but I'm not entirely sure what you're expecting. No Turnishperfallens live on the Academy's grounds. They would not be here unless someone brought them from old Workstock. Exactly! As she spoke, Hersher discovered an old staircase. We checked it for footprints, of which there were none, and then checked with the knife that there was no evidence resting in the dust. Once that was done, we started descending into the basement. In any case, Hersher continued, as I said during our staff meeting the other day, I believe we should be more suspicious of the students from Ahrensbach and Dunkelfelder. Hersher, I said, my tone cautionary. The very idea of students from Dunkelfelder being involved was preposterous, but it seemed that my glare meant nothing to her. I understand the dormitory supervisors are prone to being emotional when it comes to their own duchies, Hersher said with a dry voice. But it remains the most likely possibility. A student from another duchy would need to have purchased one in advance to have brought it here. Buying a Turnishperfallen? You can do that? Transporting black Fabies was no simple matter. You had to be well trained and very familiar with them just to handle the little ones. And Turnishperfallens were so rare that some professors hadn't even recognized the name during our meeting. The idea of students from other duchies buying them hadn't even occurred to me. I exchanged a glance with the Sovereign Knight accompanying us. Of course, one small mistake is all it would take for the student bringing the beast to sustain injury, but it's more than possible, Hersher said as we continued into the basement. This very thing happened to us 10-some years ago. Did it? I asked. Both the Sovereign Knight and I met this claim with a doubtful expression, but she nodded. There was a student who bought a Turnishperfallen from a Workstock student and set it around Ferdinand. Ooh. It was around the time when students were leaving the Royal Academy in droves to return home, and since Ferdinand's little group managed to slaughter it, the event was never publicized. It was, after all, an internal dispute within Ehrenfest. This issue is no doubt of the same colors. Hersher seemed to know something that I didn't, and I soon found myself interested in what this research-crazed laboratory woman was thinking. Basements were usually seen as commoner territory, but it seemed that knights had charged into this particular one to capture hiding nobles. The doors were broken, drawers hung open, and spiders had formed great nests among the remains of shattered pots. Everything was covered in dust, and there was no sign of anyone having been here since the dormitory was sealed off. Hersher, what do you mean of the same colors? I asked. I meant that this was done by someone who resents Ehrenfest. And why do you think that? Have you forgotten that the trail of the black Fabies made a direct course from here to the Ehrenfest gathering spot? Dunkelfelder, Ahrensbach, Fremdeltag, the Sovereignty. It wouldn't have been strange for the Turnishperfallen to head to any of those gathering spots, especially considering how much richer in mana they are, but the beast didn't even seem to hesitate for even a moment. Well, I seem to remember Ehrenfest's gathering spot having tons of mana. That would be because Lady Rosemine healed it. From what I remember, our gathering spot was never particularly bountiful. I thought back to when we had followed the trail. It surprised me to learn that Hersher was actually thinking over our situation, despite having done nothing but grumble about wanting to get back to our research. As for why they resent us, we can never know for sure unless we speak to them, Hersher continued. Perhaps they are displeased that we overtook them in the ranks. They have a personal grudge against one of our students, or there is another reason entirely. She sighed and counted each explanation on her fingers. Although she seemed disinterested and as though she would rather be anywhere else, at the same time she looked weary from thinking this matter through as thoroughly as she could. Do you have any idea on who the culprit might be? I asked. I can say nothing for certain, of course, but I do count Fraulein among our suspects. Even compared to the students, she would have the least trouble bringing a Turnishperfallen to the Academy. Careful, Hersher, this isn't the place to be making accusations like that. She glared up at the ceiling as though she were looking through the floors above, searching for something. I found this out only recently, but the divide between Ahrensbach and Ehrenfest has grown quite severe as of late. They are even treating my disciple Raymond as an immense security threat. Professors in the Royal Academy had very few opportunities to learn about current interduchy relations. Most were reliant on what they could glean from listening to the chatter among students in the dormitory and observing their behaviors in class. Upon noticing that I was hanging on her every word, Herschel gave a comically exaggerated shrug. Good grief, why can I never simply take apprentices as I see fit? You take them anyway, don't you? And the disciple you're talking about is the Ahrensbach student I met earlier today, right? You must be exaggerating. Besides, any problem between two duchies can be settled with a good old game of dinner. Dunkelfelder solutions are hardly going to work for us, Herschel said with a grimace as she opened the door to the laundry room. Inside was the magic tools that the attendants used to receive dirty clothes from the upper floors and then return them once they were clean. It was pretty interesting to look around since I normally wouldn't enter this kind of place. That said, there's nothing left here. Putting aside our relationship with Ahrensbach, Herschel said, I pray this incident was carried out by a lone actor with a grudge against the duchy. If we are dealing with a single criminal, they would surely not use the same method again. The incident has already drawn so much attention that even the Sovereign Knight's Order is on guard. She looked at the Sovereign Knight. However, if they have other goals and motivations, and Ehrenfest was simply a test subject for their plans, then we can expect to see more Turnus befallen on the Academy grounds, and no matter how many apprentice knights there may be here, Black Phoebes cannot be defeated without black weapons. Any student unfortunate enough to encounter them will need to wait for the Sovereign Knights to arrive. They are powerless otherwise, and it is crucial that the Sovereign Knights Order understands this and resolves to arrive in such situations as swiftly as possible. She may be a maniac when it comes to her research, but she's still a teacher, huh? I had assumed that Herschel was entirely focused on getting to the bottom of this incident, but here she was thinking of ways to deal with it in a subsequent attack. It hadn't even occurred to me that she was acting on her students' safety at heart, and it felt as though she was asking whether I was doing my part as a professor and thinking about how best to protect my own students. Think we'll be able to set up precautionary lines of contact and get the approval from the king for all professors of the night course to use black weapons in times of emergency, I asked. That's the spirit. I would rather not have any more of my research time wasted. Oh, come on! No sooner had I started to see Herschel in a whole new light than she was proved to me that she was the same old scientist. That said, her perspective was still valuable. As annoying as it was, I would look into improving our lines of communication. The kitchen is still covered in dust, and there was no sign of the stairs having been used, I explained. We also removed registration from all the hidden doors we passed along the way. Naturally, we found no traces of anything connected to the Turnus reform. What about you two? Fraulein, who had been investigating the upper floors, puffed out her chest. We found no traces of any Turnus reforms either, and there was no places for anyone to hide. Isn't that right, Professor Gundolf? Indeed. As it turned out, there were no signs of Turnus Befallen having used the dormitory's teleportation circle. If someone had brought the beast in, they must have used teleportation circles from the other dormitories. That was our conclusion. I shall assist the Sovereignty Knights in writing our reports to the king, Gundolf continued, so the rest of you may leave. Oh, but not you, Professor Roffin. You have a responsibility as the one who summoned the Sovereignty Knights Order, unfortunately. Thank you, Professor Gundolf, Herschel said, with a smile practically leaping at the opportunity to leave, and with that she made her exit. Gundolf next turned to Fraulein. You must be tired yourself, Professor Fraulein. You had to investigate the second and third floors without using washing. But thanks to your efforts, it is safe to say that Ahrensbach has been spared of any suspicion. Tch. Right. Indeed, Fraulein replied, her mood improving dramatically. I am quite relieved. I must go and report this to the Abbot and first wife. Gundolf saw Fraulein off with a smile, but no sooner had the door shut behind her than his expression turned gravely serious. I decided it would be best for neither Herschel nor as the Ehrenfest dormitory supervisor nor Fraulein, who cast washing as soon as we entered, to hear what I had about to say. They looked to the two sovereign knights and said in a low voice, the king must be warned. I swallowed hard as an immense pressure bore down on all those tears still present. What in the world had happened? There were traces of the teleportation circle having been used, Gundolf said. What? I shouted, then clapped a hand over my mouth, surprised or the loudness of my own voice. You're really surprised by your own voice's loudness at this point? I turned to the knight who had accompanied Gundolf, still unable to contain my shock, but it seemed that he was just as taken aback. I was with you, but I noticed nothing of the sort, he said questioningly. I was an Archduke candidate once, Gundolf said. I took Archduke courses at the Academy. There are things I know to look for that others would not. Things that you and Professor Fraulein would not have noticed. The knight blinked several times. It seemed that he really hadn't noticed anything. I cannot speak the details, for it pertains to the syllabus of the Archduke course. Gundolf continued, if you wish to confirm it for yourselves, you will most likely need to bring a member of the royalty who has graduated from the Academy as an Archduke candidate with you. Both the Sovereign Knights and I nodded. Prince Hildebrand was the first person who came to mind, considering that he was a royal, but he was yet old enough to take any lessons. Let alone graduated, he wouldn't be able to help us in these circumstances. Gundolf sighed and started stroking his beard in thought. Lady Rosamind's inquiry holds more meaning than that now more than ever. She knows black spells that no person from this temple should even be aware of, and she performed healing on the gathering spot. Those peculiarities, along with several others, means there is much to be suspicious of. Wasn't Ehrenfest the victim here, I asked, blinking in surprise. I was convinced that from listening to Herscher that the culprit was someone with a grudge against Ehrenfest. I do not think that Professor Herscher was right, or Professor Frollin was right about everything. What with her, how emotional she became, but her point that Ehrenfest has not suffered from this incident certainly was food for thought. Because they were able to handle themselves. Duh. A Trinish Buffon had gone on a rampage, the apprentice knights had slain it with black weapons granted them by Lady Rosamine, and the damaged gathering spot was healed to be even more bountiful than those of other duchies. If one looked at the results, it was true that Ehrenfest hadn't really been victims. Yes, but they were still attacked, they just managed to survive it. We cannot discard the possibility that Ehrenfest was using the Trinish Buffon to perform some experiment or another, Gundalf continued. That dormitory has no supervisor present, which meant the Archducarians have complete power there. Well, they ain't gonna do anything, dude. Everyone knew that Herscher was never at the dormitory, and although the students were tasked with reporting any goings-on, there was no way to know whether what they said was the truth. A chill ran down my spine. I hadn't thought about that at all. It may be wise to have one of the king's retainers attend Lady Rosamine's inquiry. Perhaps his head scholar or the sovereign knife commander, Gundalf suggested. Not a single man disagreed. Well, that inquiry's not happening, because she's having to go back. Here's to the library committee. Woohoo! Oh, the shoe bill. So cute. Depending on how you think about it, Ferdinand's charms sure are useful. Please do not test, we are just praying they do not activate. Look at us, the walking explosive! She might blow up if you touch her. That's mean. Okay, I think that's it, and I will see everybody in the next one.